Most of the food we eat in Canada is produced on conventional farms. A small portion comes from organic ones. Both are part of a diverse and sustainable food system in Canada. Both produce nutritious food, but do it differently. Do you know how? The answers might surprise you. So join us as we dig into organic and conventional farming practices to understand their similarities and differences. Conventional farming is the most common type of farming in Canada. A conventional farmer can use any approved natural or synthetic fertilizer, pesticide, and herbicide. They use genetically modified seeds as well as non-genetically modified ones. They can use regulated antibiotics on sick or injured livestock. But only beef cattle can be given growth hormones, and there's a withdrawal period before any animal or their product can be processed if they're given either. Conventional farming aims at achieving the best possible yield from land and livestock. We spoke with an expert on agriculture to learn more. What are the advantages of conventional farming?
The main one, probably over the last 25 years, is just how the sustainability of food production has rapidly increased. So through a combination of improved seed genetics, the adoption of genetically modified crop technologies, advances in chemicals and fertilizers and equipment use, that farmers have removed about 97% of what was summer fallow going back over the last 40 years. So we hardly have any soil erosion in prairie agriculture anymore.
How has conventional farming helped the Canadian economy?
Our sustainable agriculture and the science behind crop production is contributing to increasing yields, so there's more jobs in our value-added food processing. It contributes additional revenue in terms of the yields that are generated, the crops that are exported, additional demand for value-added products. And I guess the final contribution would be economically, it helps keep our food prices a little bit lower, because the more we produce, that contributes to keeping food prices at least constant.
What are farmers doing to make conventional farming more sustainable?
The biggest change would be in adopting genetically modified crops. That's really been a transition in terms of reducing summer fallow use. So we took a look at comparing tillage, which is summer fallow, that you till your field instead of producing a crop. And depending on how much moisture you get, you would till that field anywhere from 5 to 10 times a summer. And each time you did, you burned fuel to do that, and you released carbon from the soil. So in Saskatchewan, only about 3% of our productive land is in summer. So 97% is in continuous crop. In Europe, 75% of their land is tilled from year to year. So our land is far more sustainable than European agriculture production. That's been the thing that's allowed farmers to become more sustainable, is to get effective weed control from the integration of herbicide-tolerant, genetically modified crops. And that's really been what's transitioned prairie agriculture to, I won't say we are the most sustainable farmers in the world, but I would put our farmers up against anybody else and say that, you know what, when it comes and you look at everything, our farmers are among the most sustainable food producers in the world.
Canadian agriculture uses GMOs, or genetically modified seeds. Why do farmers rely on them, use them, and how widespread are they?
The main three crops that we grow are genetically modified canola, corn, and soybeans. Corn and canola would be 95 to 98% genetically modified in this country, and soybeans would be somewhere between 85 and maybe 90%. Farmers use them because they're an effective economical technology. Farmers are business owners, and I think that's something that a lot of urban Canadians don't appreciate, is that farming in the 21st century requires a lot of technical competencies and fiscal capabilities as well. That, you know, economics is so important to farmers that they're trying and adopting technologies. And if the technology doesn't increase their revenue, they won't use it. So the simple fact that 95% of farmers are growing GM canola shows that technology is economically benefits them. And when I talk to farmers, they say the biggest asset I have to transfer to my children is the health of my soil. So farmers aren't going to use technologies that deplete the health of their soil. They're looking for technologies that will complement improving their soil health. So I think for those two reasons, it's improving their soil health, the environment, and economically benefiting their family business.
What is the difference between synthetic and natural pesticides, fertilizers, and herbicides?
So the synthetic ones are just chemical compounds created in a laboratory and then produced and mixed with water. So I've seen some surveys that suggest, and even some of our own research, that when the public sees farmers spraying a field, they think it's 100% chemical. Yet over 95% of that is water, because that's how effective weed control is done. You mix a couple of cups of chemical with several gallons or liters now, I guess, of water, and that spray is applied that way. So there's a fraction of what goes on. And so the synthetic ones are rigorously tested. They have to go through an extensive environmental risk assessment, impacts on non-target organisms like birds and butterflies, bees, aquatic species, and if chemicals end up in the watershed. So the Pest Management Review Agency does a very thorough risk assessment. Canada has some of the most effective regulations of any country in the world when it comes to this, ensuring that chemicals used in agriculture and food production are safe for consumers.
Organic farming is gaining momentum in Canada. Certified organic farms account for about 5% of farming, but it's increasing each year. What does organic farming mean? It's farming that doesn't use synthetic pesticides, fertilizers, herbicides, or genetically modified organisms to grow food. Instead, it relies on the natural breakdown of organic matter. Organic farmers rely mostly on biological methods for pest control, like insects that eat crop-destroying pests. Their animals are not given supplements or antibiotics. Rarely, exceptions are made for antibiotics, but there's a longer withdrawal period. Organic farms must meet the requirements of the Canadian Organic Standards. Organic farming aims to grow food in a way that minimizes soil degradation, promotes biodiversity, and prioritizes animal welfare. Can you explain some typical organic farming practices compared to typical conventional farming practices, how they differ and how some of them are similar?
So the main one is weed control, and that's where genetically modified crops have really contributed to sustainable agriculture, because farmers will seed, they'll get effective weed control, whereas in an organic farming situation, tillage is predominantly the main form of weed control. And that's what agriculture looked like in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and that's why we had significant soil erosion. We had wind erosion when there was rain, heavy winds, when snow melted. Because of the tillage, we had a lot of erosion issues. So by conventional agriculture adopting genetically modified crops, they've gone to zero-till or minimum till in over 95% of our land. So we've increased moisture conservation, but we've really reduced soil erosion. So farmers aren't having those issues anymore. And that's probably the biggest challenge, is that the organic sector has to eventually rely on tillage to control their weeds.
What are some advantages of organic farming?
Organic farming fits a niche. There's a lot of affluent consumers that believe this is an option they want to have, and so it provides an opportunity for people that want to have that in their lives. The reality is that if you don't control for insects, weeds, and plant disease, yields take a significant hit, and so that results in higher food prices. And if you've made a trip to the grocery store and you've looked at the price of an organic product versus a non-organic product, I've not yet seen the organic product be cheaper than the non-organic alternative. So it does cost more money. And so that's why I've always viewed organic as filling a role for a very affluent section of society that can afford to pay the higher premiums to buy those products.
What are some of the disadvantages of organic farming?
The main disadvantage of organic farming is the lower yields. So there's been really good research by the United States Department of Agriculture, and there are a couple of crops like rye and a couple of others that are very competitive with conventional yields. But things like strawberries and spinach, the yield lags are 65 to 70%. On average, it's about 1/3. So organic farming produces less food per acre.
In some cases, chemical fertilizers are allowed on organic farms. Can you tell us what type of chemicals and in what situations?
So one example is for insect control in corn. Corn borers come in and burrow into the cob and cause damage, and that exposure then creates mycotoxins that are linked to cancer in humans. And so the organic industry, to try and control corn borers, sprays BT, the chemical, on organic corn crops. Whereas genetically modified corn has taken the gene, that BT gene that repels the insects, they put it in the corn so that the corn borers never get a chance to attack the corn. So that's one example where the organic industry is using the chemical, whereas conventional agriculture is using the technology and uses less chemical.
Organic farms are allowed to use chemical pesticides in certain situations, but they have to be naturally derived chemicals.
That would be the predominant amount of chemicals that are used in the agriculture sector, is ones that are derived naturally from different plants. And over time, they're trying to increase the number of chemical options that are available for organic agriculture simply due to the pest pressures. And climate change is having an impact on that. It's, changing diseases and insect populations and where insects ranges, that's been changing over time as well. So the organic industry is constantly battling, the same as the rest of agriculture.
Are you aware of some type of biological weed control?
Some of what the organic industry will do is try to what's called intercropping. So they'll put one crop in and then they'll try and find a compatible crop that may have some insects that provide resistant to insects that would damage the crop from being able to enter into the field. So there are examples of where intercropping within the organic sector is providing some opportunities for them to mitigate some of the challenges that would impact their yields.
So what is the difference nutritionally between organic and conventionally grown foods?
So I know a lot of the public think that organic has more nutrition, but nutrition of crops is based on soil quality. And so you can have a field of organics on one side of the road and conventional on the other, and if the soil is the same, the nutrients of the crops produced are going to be equal. So in a lot of cases, there's statistically no difference between the nutrition of an organic crop and the nutrition of a conventional crop, because it's all based on soil nutrients, not the process used to grow the crop.
Both conventional and organic farmers want to be able to produce food into the future, so the health of their land and livestock is important to both. We've seen some differences, so let's look at some similarities between the two. All farmers are bound by regulations that ensure that food produced in Canada is safe to eat. Both organic and conventional farmers can use pesticides. All pesticides are approved by Canada's Pest Management Regulatory Agency. Both approaches use integrated pest management. It means monitoring fields to only use pesticides when there's a need to, as well as techniques like crop rotation and soil tillage. How do both methods of farming rely on science and technology to ensure sustainability?
So organic and conventional farmers really rely on largely the same science to get seeds to the farm. Organic farmers are restricted from using genetically modified crops as part of organic production, but they rely on the same technologies that increase drought tolerance or yield. Any of the science behind the conventional varieties, organic and conventional, are the same. Where they begin to diverge a little bit is what happens once the crop's in the field. So organic farmers rely solely on natural livestock manure. And a lot of conventional farmers rely on that too. There's livestock producers that are still producing grain, or if they're in close proximity to hog barns or livestock operations, that manure gets spread as nutrients on their field, which contributes to reducing their synthetic fertilizer. On the chemical side of things, conventional farmers rely on the science of of synthetic chemicals, and organic farmers rely on the natural compounds that their standards will allow them to use. And probably on the chemical side is really where we start to notice significant changes. And farmers can soil test, and it will tell them exactly what their soil needs in terms of nutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur. And organic farmers have a little bit more challenge because with livestock manure, it's more difficult to get that balance, whereas conventional farmers can blend all four of those components and deliver exactly what their soil needs in terms of nutritional requirements.
We've talked about conventional and organic farming practices, but not about the food they produce. So we turned to a registered dietitian to know more. Is organically grown food more nutritious for us?
This is such a great question, and I want to kind of look at two different ways to answer this question. So the first would be the actual nutrient density of organic versus conventionally grown foods, and then the health outcomes in humans. So first, when we look at fruit and vegetables, our produce, a systematic review out of Stanford University compared organic and conventionally grown foods, and really they only found one nutrient difference, and that was phosphorus. Organic food had more phosphorus than conventionally grown foods, but really this has no long-term health impact in humans. When we look at milk and meat, so looking at dairy and beef cattle, the biggest differences here seem to be whether or not the cattle are grass-fed. In Canada, grass feeding is limited in the winter months. But most Canadian cattle and dairy farmers will feed a combination of grass and grain. Now, organic milk does have higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids, but this doesn't really impact human health because milk itself is not a good source of omega-3s. So we don't go to milk for our omega-3 consumption to boost our omega-3 intake. When it comes to beef, both organic and conventionally grown beef contain 14 essential nutrients. Organic beef has been shown to have slightly higher monounsaturated and omega-3 fatty acids, but this seems to relate to whether or not the cows have been grass-fed. So again, there can be limitations around this, and there doesn't seem to be any evidence long-term in the health of humans. And finally, looking at the antioxidant status of conventionally grown and organically grown foods, there is no difference between the two.
Do genetically modified seeds produce more nutritious food?
At this time, there doesn't seem to be a difference between the nutritional value of genetically modified foods and organic foods. However, it could be argued that the avoidance of GM technology in organic foods really misses some of the benefits that we see in the precise plant breeding of GM technology. So we're able to produce more insect and weed resistant crops and reduce food waste and so on.
So to consumers, what is the difference between organic food and conventionally grown food?
This is an interesting one because I hear a lot from clients. I would say one of the biggest differences is the cost. This is one of the, I think, first differences that people might notice. Another difference, and this can go both ways, is the quality. So where some people might believe that the quality of organic foods is higher because they believe it is more nutritious or quote unquote healthier, other people actually believe the quality is lower, and this might relate to qualities like uniformity, color, shape, and size. I think also a lot of consumers believe that organic food is more natural. Both organic and conventional farming practices use techniques that are beneficial. So crop rotation and using cover crops, both use approved pesticides, and both have to comply with Health Canada's pesticide residue limits, which are very, very low and very safe here in Canada. So because we don't have any long-term data on the health benefits of consuming organic foods, and that it's not actually more nutritious or less nutritious than conventionally grown foods, I think what's important here is also the consumption habits and the people who consume organic foods. So studies show that people buying organic foods tend to be female, they tend to be health conscious, and they tend to be more physically active, as well as in the higher education and income brackets. This is important because when it comes to the health and well-being of people, we know that social determinants of health play an important role. So the level of education and income, food access, whether or not they experience racism or discrimination, these are all things that affect a person's health and well-being. So people consuming organic foods in higher income and education brackets who are more physically active and more health conscious might hold more privilege that helps to keep them healthier as well. Studies show also that people consuming organic foods tend to have more plant-based eating patterns. So they're eating more nuts and seeds, whole grains, and legumes, which also have health-promoting benefits.
What are some of the myths and misconceptions about organic and conventionally grown foods?
So the biggest myths and misconceptions about conventional versus organically grown food really lie in the nutritional benefits of one over the other. That one is more natural than another. That all the food that we eat is genetically modified, and that one is of better quality over another.
Labeling can really confuse consumers. At a meat section, we can see a package of meat that says raised without antibiotics sitting next to a package that says antibiotic free. Is it the same thing?
So according to Health Canada, being raised without antibiotics means that if an animal had gotten sick, they wouldn't have received antibiotics at all in any form. So not in injection, not in the feed, not in the water. Antibiotic free basically means that an animal could have received antibiotics at some point in its lifetime. But one thing is for sure is that by the time we get the food to the grocery store, all animal products are free of antibiotics. There are withdrawal periods, and the food, once it comes to the grocery stores, do not contain antibiotics in the system.
What is the difference between a package that says raised organically or certified organic?
So a certified organic means that the content of that product has to be 95% or more organic food or organic products. And it has to be certified with an organic label of some kind. It has to go through certification, and then the product has to use that label. So organically raised, they would still have to comply with the regulations of 95% or more organic content, but because they're not necessarily certified by organic label, they can't use the label. So they do still have to qualify through Health Canada's regulations, but they cannot use the certification or labeling.
What is absence labeling, and how can it influence consumer purchases?
Great question. We're seeing more and more of this, and essentially it's a product that contains a label marketing something that doesn't exist. For example, rice, which is a gluten-free food, having a logo or a product label that says gluten-free. It's a marketing ploy, and that's all. So consumers might be influenced by a health halo effect. So for example, caffeine-free when the product doesn't have caffeine to begin with. So again, it's just really playing on the emotions and the values of the consumer for sales.
So what should consumers know about conventionally and organically grown foods?
I think consumers should know that choosing organic versus conventionally grown foods, it comes down to a choice. Consumers want choice, and they want a choice that aligns with their values, with accessibility and affordability.
Whether organically grown or conventionally grown, how safe is the food grown in Canada?
Canada's food supply is safe, and it is regarded as having one of the highest food safety standards worldwide. While both conventionally grown foods and organically grown foods can use regulated pesticides, it's important to know that there are pesticide limits that the farmers can use, and the farmer does not want to use a lot of pesticides because it costs a lot of money. So the farmers themselves are looking after other agricultural ways to maximize crops, as well as limiting pesticide use. We know that by the time the food comes to the market, most of the food has very low pesticide residues. And again, those residues are set way below the safety limits for the safety of the people. Not just any pesticide can be used. Pesticides go through rigorous testing for many, many, many years and cost billions of dollars. So it is not something that is used lightly. Safety testing is conducted, but the pesticide residue limits not only have to meet Canada's standards, but worldwide standards because of the food trade worldwide.
The strength of the Canadian food system is its diversity. Thriving conventional and organic farms, small and large, and a variety of crops and livestock. So the next time you sit down to enjoy a meal, think about the variety of agriculture Canada supports. It's not only a matter of producing healthy food, it's about farming diversity, sustainability, and food security. That's something to chew on.